Welcome back everybody. Today I want to talk about why I think this lens is the only lens you really need for your Fujifilm system under specific circumstances. Of course I'm talking about the Fujifilm XF 16-80mm f4 R OIS WR lens, and all these letters mean there are a lot of features on this lens. For example, the R stands for the aperture ring it has, the OIS obviously the optical image stabilization. The WR means this lens has weather sealing, and you can buy this lens alone for about 600 euros right now. So this lens is actually the first lens I picked up together with my Fujifilm X-T4 when I first bought it, I think about 2 years ago. And it was actually my only lens for quite a while, I think 1 year. And as I'm shooting mostly landscapes, woodland photography and travel photography, this lens was actually ideal for me. So as the Fujifilm X system is actually a crop sensor system and this lens is a 16-80mm lens, this means that in full frame equivalent it's about 24 to 120 millimeters. And I think that's mostly enough for like 95% of my shots, or used to be, for the first year using it. Of course, if you don't go overboard with it, if you want to shoot birds or something like that, of course you can't reach it with 80 millimeters. And for the wide angle side, I mostly helped myself if I needed an actual wider shot than 24 millimeters to just shoot vertical images, like 3 or 4 together, and just stitch them together. And that actually worked out quite well for me. Obviously, you can only do that with a static scene. So for the telephoto side, I never really needed anything more than 80 millimeters. The only time I really needed more was when I was shooting landscapes and you want to shoot like a very intimate detail in a vast landscape. And that's sometimes a bit hard with 80 millimeters because you have to really get in there. But other than that, this lens was good enough, or like it got me everything I needed. Right, so I'm just going to go over a couple of reasons why I think you should probably get this lens. First of all, the versatility. As I already mentioned, 16-80 or 24 to 120 millimeters full frame equivalent is a very broad focal range, and it gets you very far, from nature to street to travel, whatever. It basically covers the entirety of it. And all of that it does with only 440 grams, and it's already also quite compact, so it's almost like an invaluable addition to your camera bag. Secondly, and for this I'm gonna overlay a couple of pictures as an example to bring my point across, is that this lens has an incredible magnification ratio of only 1:4 at 80 millimeters. And all of this while being basically like a kit lens. That's just incredible. And thirdly, the image quality of this lens is really good. I wouldn't say it's superb, because for the money you're paying, 600 euros on a zoom lens with such a broad range, obviously you will not get superb. But it's very good for the price you pay. And of course you could get better image quality if you would get a lens like the 60-55 f2.8, I think. But the problem is, this lens is already double the price of this, or almost double the price. I think it's like 1,150, and this lens is 600 euros. And honestly, the price or the jump in image quality really does not reflect in the price. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep into image quality because I don't think image quality is all that important, to be honest, because if people are looking at your picture and they're looking for the image quality rather than the composition, you know that the image or the composition you have in this image is unfortunately not very good. So image quality is still important because it can still enhance an image, and this lens will give you good image quality, but it's not the end-all be-all. So my fourth point why I think this lens might actually be the only lens you really need for your landscape, woodland and travel photography is the weather sealing on this lens. To me as a landscape photographer, weather sealing is very important because oftentimes the best conditions are just after it rained or stormed. And if I don't have weather sealing on my lens, I wouldn't really dare going out with my photography equipment, because honestly, photography equipment is quite expensive, and not having weather sealing wouldn't really give me the confidence to use it outside in these conditions. And yeah, basically very good reason for this lens, to get this lens. And on this point, the build quality of this lens is actually quite remarkable, especially for a lens for 600 euros. It's almost entirely metal except the extending tube when you zoom out, and the focus ring. But other than that, it's almost entirely metal, as far as I can tell. It feels very sturdy in my hands. I also have the 70-300mm Fuji lens, and that feels a bit plasticky, but this lens, very sturdy, very solid. And lastly, why I think this lens is actually a great lens is, even though it's only f4 and people might worry that you won't be able to shoot sharp pictures in the dusk, because it's only f4, the image stabilization in this lens is really good, especially in combination with my Fujifilm X-T4 that I'm filming on right now. I think I can get up to 6.5 stops of image stabilization. This basically means that when it's darker, I can shoot, well, not just darker, but in any conditions, I can shoot up to 1/10 of a second shutter speed, and I will still get a sharp image. And I think that's quite incredible, so not to worry about the f4. Alright, so let's get to the disadvantages, and honestly I had quite a hard time to come up with disadvantages with this lens, especially for the price you pay for it. That to say, I'm not in any way, shape or form affiliated to Fujifilm or anything like that. I got two disadvantages, I think. And both aren't really disadvantages if you factor in the price. First of all, the lens is f4, which basically means for portrait photographers, this is not really the lens for you to go, because you probably want even lower than f2, probably like 1.4, 1.2, or even f1. So that's not really for portrait photographers, but as I mentioned earlier, it's mostly used for landscape, woodland, and travel photography by me. So that's not really a disadvantage in my opinion. And the second disadvantage, if you want to call it that, is the extending tube. It's not really a problem that it shifts the weight around, so when I'm holding it and I'm extending, zooming out, that it shifts the weight and the camera's unstable. That's not really something that occurred to me. I'm really coming from a purely aesthetic standpoint that when I zoom out, I just don't think it looks great. But honestly, for 600 euros, you can't really do an internal zoom, and if you would do that, the lens would be huge. Probably way heavy as well, so I wouldn't really say it's a disadvantage, but it's something that kind of bothers me or I don't specifically like about the lens. So this is it from me for this lens today, and I want to finish off with something that's very important for me to say, I think. And it's, even though you might have the Fujifilm X system and this might actually be the only one lens to go, doesn't specifically mean that you need to buy it. So if you have the Fujifilm 18-55mm or even a third-party zoom lens or a prime lens or whatever, the only moment you should really think about buying a new lens is if your lens, the one you're using, is actively holding you back. If you have the 18-55mm lens, for example, and you're thinking of upgrading to the 16-80mm lens, there are a couple of questions you should ask yourself. First of all, do you shoot a lot of your images while it's raining or after it just stopped raining? And the second question would be, do you really do you want to go further than 55mm, or do you actually shoot a lot of images at 55mm, meaning you probably want to go further than that? If that's a no to both of those questions, you probably don't really need to upgrade because your gear is not really holding you back. I mean, of course you can still get it, but it might not be worth it. In my opinion, one of the most important rules when it comes to gear acquisition is you should always use your lenses or your gear in general to its full potential. And only if it's actually holding you back, you should go back and think about getting new gear. Otherwise, you'll probably be another victim of gear acquisition syndrome, which is basically obsessing over gear the entire time, which is not really healthy, and it's not really a way to go, because oftentimes you'll probably blame the lack of gear on bad compositions you're shooting, and most of the time it's not actually the reason you're shooting bad compositions. Anyway, this is it from me for today. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of this lens? Are you thinking of buying it, or maybe you even own it yourself? And if you do, what do you think of this lens? Are you as convinced as I am? If you like this video, I would really appreciate if you would give me a thumbs up. It really boosts the YouTube algorithm, and if you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. Anyway, have a good day.